Egyptian architecture. Being highly influenced by the columnar and trabetted type of architecture, Egyptian architecture revolved around religious temples, tombs, obelisks, etc. Religious sentiments were also a part of the architecture in terms of the lotus, papyrus, and palm capitals. As we discussed in the previous lecture, that there are 6 key elements that influences the architecture are geographical, geological, climate, religion, social, political, and historical. Let's take a look at ancient Egyptian timeline. You can pause here and take a look around. Let's start with geographical. As we all know that geographical conditions heavily influence the civilization and cultural development of each country. If you look into the map of Egypt, it is situated between the Mediterranean and Arabian Seas, had strategic trade routes through the Nile and the Red Sea, allowing access to foreign markets and imports. The fertile lands along the Nile supported the growth of cities, where significant historical remains like tombs, temples, and pyramids can be found. Geological. The architectural style of each country is influenced by the availability of materials such as wood, brick, or stone. In Egypt, the abundant supply of limestone, sandstone, and granite, particularly syenite, greatly influenced the architecture and contributed to the preservation of many remains. Due to the scarcity of suitable wood for building, bricks were used but often covered with a more robust material. Climate. Egypt's climate is equable and warm, with no snow or frost and rare storms and rain, contributing to the preservation of its temples. The climate allowed for simple construction due to the absence of extreme weather conditions, necessitating only minimal protection against the heat. The 2 main seasons, spring and summer, influenced the architectural qualities, enabling straightforward construction designs and minimal need for weather protection measures. Religion. Ancient Egyptian architecture was deeply influenced by religion and a powerful priesthood with traditional and mysterious religious rites. The Egyptians were highly knowledgeable in various subjects, and their literature was preserved in papyrus manuscripts. Though their religion was theoretically monotheistic, it was practically polytheistic, and they believed in an afterlife, leading to the construction of lasting monuments like the pyramids for tombs. Social and political. A large population worked for food, enabling cheap labor for significant projects. Centralized, despotic government supported the execution of grand structures. Spare time during annual floods or rafts for transporting stones might have aided construction. Later, captives and foreigners were forced to work on public projects, raising concerns among the native population. Historical. The Egyptian civilization is the oldest known, dating back over 4,000 years BC. Information comes from Holy Scripture, Greek and Roman authors, and Egyptian buildings. The pyramids are remarkably ancient, predating any structure in Western Asia. The kings or pharaohs are arranged in 30 dynasties until BC 332, based on the work of Egyptian priest Manetho. Here, you can see the ancient Egypt timeline. You can pause the video and take a look around. The 19th dynasty, led by Ramesses I and his grandson Ramesses II, marked a brilliant era of Egyptian art seen in the temples of Thebes and other locations. Egypt was later conquered by the Persians in 527 BC, but Alexander the Great recaptured it in 332 BC. After Alexander's death, Egypt passed to Ptolemy, forming a dynasty that ruled until 31 BC. Following wars and the death of Cleopatra, Egypt became a Roman province. In AD 638, the Arabs conquered Egypt, leaving significant monuments. It became part of the Turkish dominions in AD 1517. Architectural characters. In ancient Egypt, they built houses and buildings using mud, clay, and reeds. Later, they started using strong stones like granite. Buildings had a sloped design to strengthen mud structures, resembling an arch. Reeds and palm trunks were used for doors and windows. The columns and capitals in their buildings looked like bundles of reeds tied together. Even when they changed materials, they kept the same designs. They decorated the walls with special designs and writings called hieroglyphics. The Egyptians liked to keep things the same way, even when things around them were changing. They built amazing pyramids and temples. Pyramids are huge and required a lot of work to make. The temples have a special style with buildings getting smaller towards the back. The tombs are mysterious and dark with paintings and writings on the walls. Egyptians were great at art and made strong and impressive buildings. Egyptian architecture examples. Sphinx. The Great Sphinx is a natural rock formation resembling a lion with the head of a man. Its dimensions are 65 feet high by 188 feet long, with a face 13 feet 6 inches wide and a mouth 8 feet 6 inches long. The Sphinx is considered a marvel and symbolizes an unsolvable mystery. Captain Caviglia excavated it in 1816 and found a temple between its paws. It has been examined by other experts since then. The Pyramid. The pyramids of Gizeh are ancient monuments near Cairo, built during the 4th dynasty. They were constructed as tombs for the kings to achieve immortality by preserving their mummies. The Great Pyramid of Cheops is the largest and most well-known, with equilateral triangle faces and an original height of 482 feet. It has an entrance on the northern side leading to the king's chamber, 34 feet 6 inch by 17 feet and 19 feet high, where the sarcophagus of the king was placed. There are 2 other chambers, the queen's chamber and a chamber below ground. The exterior was originally covered with limestone casing, but it has mostly disappeared over time. The tombs. There are 3 types of tombs developed in different time span. First, ancient time, mastabas, rectangle structure. They have side sloping of 75-degree and flat roof. Example are mastabas of Thy Saqqara. 5th dynasty. The mastabas have 3 different chambers. First, the outer chamber. Second, inner secret chamber. And third, a well. Second is Middle Empire. In this time, tombs has pyramidical forms. The tombs at Beni Hassan in Egypt are rock-cut structures. There are 39 tombs arranged in a row on the rocks, dating back to the 12th dynasty. One tomb, known as tomb number 3, has unique 16-sided columns that may have influenced the Greek Doric order. Third is New Empire. In this time, tombs are rock-cut and structural. Example are Deir el-Bahri. Thebes was a necropolis for Egyptian kings and has many tombs dating from the New Empire. The tombs consist of chambers connected with rock-cut passages and were used to hold sarcophagi. The walls of the tombs were decorated with hieroglyphics and pictures representing the journey to the afterlife, and mortuary temples were used for offerings and funeral rites. Temples. The ancient Egyptian temples were used for religious services, but only the king and priests were allowed inside for mysteries and processions. These temples were different from Greek temples, Christian churches, or Islamic mosques, as they were not places for public gatherings or common prayers. Some temples were dedicated to specific deities or events, like the Memesi, dedicated to the accouchement of Isis. Most temples had chambers, courts, colonnades, and halls within a high surrounding wall. Great Temple of Ammon at Karnak. The Great Temple of Ammon in Karnak is the grandest, covering an area of 1,200 feet by 360 feet. It was expanded over time by various kings, from the 12th dynasty to the Ptolemaic period, resulting in 6 pylons, a great court, the Grand Hypostyle Hall, and other halls and courts. The Hypostyle Hall is awe-inspiring, with 134 columns in 16 rows, some reaching 80 feet in height, adorned with lotus blossom-type capitals to receive light from the clerestory. The hall's walls and columns are covered with inscriptions and colored decorations related to the gods and those involved in its construction. Temple of Sethos, first at Abydos. The Temple of Sethos, first in Abydos, is dedicated to Osiris and other deities. It was constructed by Sethos I and completed by Ramesses II. The temple's walls are made of fine-grained limestone and adorned with exquisite Egyptian sculptures. It stands out from other temples with its 7 sanctuaries side by side, each with its separate gateway and portal, and a wing at right angles due to the nearby hill. Great Temple of Abu Simbel. Great Temple of Abu Simbel, built by Ramesses II, BC 1333-13, entirely excavated out of solid rock. Facade is 119 feet wide, over 100 feet high, with 4 seated colossi of Ramesses II, each over 65 feet tall. Vestibule with 8 pillars, walls with vividly colored reliefs. Small hypostyle hall, 36 feet by 25 feet with 4 pillars. Sanctuary with an altar and 4 seated figures of deities. Temple of Isis at Island of Philae. Temple of Isis, Island of Philae, Ptolemaic period. It has forecourt with massive pylon, 150 feet broad, 60 feet high. Birthhouse, Horus, on the west side, small colonnaded temple. Colonnaded building for priests on the east side. Second pylon, 105 feet broad, 40 feet high. Temple proper, courts, hypostyle hall with 8 columns, 2 small vestibules, sanctuary, and adjoining chambers. Second pylon and group with axis at an angle to the first pylon and courtyard. Walls inside and out covered with inscriptions. Temple of Hathor at Dendera. Temple of Hathor, Dendera, Ptolemaic example, completed in the reign of Augustus, 1st century AD. No pylons, forecourt, or enclosing outer walls. Great vestibule with 24 columns, 6 forming the facade, hypostyle hall with 6 columns, chambers, and sanctuary. Staircases lead to the roof. Temple of Edfu. Greco-Roman period, Temple of Edfu, commenced by Ptolemy III, BC 237. Massive pylon with reliefs and inscriptions leading to a great court with a colonnade. Great hypostyle hall with 6 columns, smaller hypostyle hall with 12 columns, rich floral capitals with heads of Hathor, vestibules, smaller chambers, and sanctuary. Obelisk. Obelisks are monumental pillars, usually in pairs before temple entrances. Monoliths, square on plan with slightly rounded faces, tapering sides, and pyramidal summit. Height about 9 to 10 times the diameter, with hieroglyphics on the 4 faces. Some capped with metal. Examples are Rome's Lateran obelisk with 104 feet high and 600 tons. Cleopatra's Needle in London 68 feet 6 inches high and 180 tons. Dwellings. Ancient Egyptian houses were built of wood or sun-dried bricks and had 1, 2, or 3 stories. No authentic remains exist, but a conjecturally restored illustration of an Egyptian house was erected at the Paris exhibition in 1889. The restored house had a garden in front, fish ponds, a central corridor giving access to rooms, a staircase leading to a veranda, and a flat roof, and was decorated with colorful paint. Comparative study of architectural elements. Plans. Temples were planned for internal effect and had grand hypostyle halls with many pillars and mysterious illumination from above. Externally, temples had massive pylons decorated with incised decorations, and often had obelisks and sphinxes in front. Construction of these temples took many centuries, with continuous additions and modifications. Egyptian temple planning sometimes lacked symmetry, giving rise to a picturesque and irregular grouping of walls and features. Walls. Walls were immensely thick, sometimes made of granite in important buildings and brick faced with granite in less important ones. The walls of temples had a characteristic slope inwards or batter towards the top, giving them a massive appearance. Unlike Greek architecture, Egyptian buildings typically lacked external columns, with a massive blank wall and a characteristic cornice as the main features. Walls were decorated with fine plaster and low reliefs executed in bright colors, contributing to the style's simplicity, solidity, and grandeur. Openings. Openings in Egyptian temples were mostly square-headed and covered with massive lintels. The arch was not commonly used in Egyptian architecture, as the style was predominantly trebeted, using beams and lintels. Temples rarely had window openings. Instead, light was admitted through clerestories in the earlier examples or over low dwarf walls between columns in later periods, Ptolemaic and Roman. Roofs. Roofs in Egyptian architecture were made of massive blocks of stone. Temples had flat roofs, supported by enclosing walls and closely spaced columns. Flat roofs were also used in dwelling houses for family gatherings and enjoyment of views. Rock-cut temples sometimes had ceilings slightly arched in form, and the roofing was designed to represent timber construction. Columns. Egyptian architecture drew inspiration from natural elements such as the papyrus reed and the lotus water lily. Columns, usually around 6 times their diameter in height, were designed to resemble the stalks of these plants. The columns had bands at intervals to mimic the tied appearance of the reeds. Capitals of the columns were often derived from the lotus plant. Lotus bud. The fully grown lotus flower. The palm. The Isis or Hathor-headed capital found at Dendera, and Phil resembles heads of the goddess, Isis, supporting a model of a pylon. Moldings. The main moldings used in Egyptian architecture were the hollow and bead, often combined together. They were commonly found crowning the upper part of pylons and walls. Ornaments. Symbolic ornament played a significant role in Egyptian architecture. Common features included the solar disk or globe and the vulture with outspread wings symbolizing protection. Diaper patterns, spirals, and the feather ornament were frequently used. The scarab, or sacred beetle, was a symbol of resurrection and represented the Egyptian religion. Egyptians were skilled in using colors, primarily blue, red, and yellow, for wall decorations. Hieroglyphics were an integral part of decoration, conveying both decorative and instructional purposes. Natural objects like the lotus plant and palm were conventionally stylized for ornamentation. Thank you for watching. In the next video, we will talk about West Asiatic architecture called as Mesopotamian civilization.